Okay. Oh my God. Yay. Christmas stream. Ah! I'm very excited. Um, can you hear me? Can you see me? Is this all going smoothly? Please let me know. I think everything's fine. Guess we'll see. Yeah. Okay, yes, thank you. Oh my God. So I moved recently and I was terrified that I didn't have everything like set up properly, but it actually looks okay. I got my lighting set up and I can change it as well. And I wanted it to be Christmassy, but like I'm using my partner's webcam. Hello, webcam. And like this is supposed to be green. When I look at it, it's very green, but that's like a light crystal blue. Whatever. Christmas is blue this year. um, Good. So, welcome to the stream. On this stream, I am going to be reading A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And I got this copy years and years ago. It's really gorgeous. It's this leather-bound copy. It's got end papers that are holly. You can see that. Sprigs of holly. And also gold edges as well, like sprayed gold edges. It's really gorgeous. It has no publisher on the spine, and the back is just a wreath. It feels like the kind of thing that you would find, right? Yes, no, you're right. Blue is snowy. Let's say that this is an icy room today. But you know, in like spooky movie, I don't know, a horror movie, someone goes into an attic or a basement or something and they find a book and it's like an old leather-bound book and it's got no publisher, it's got no publication date, it's just a very mysterious old thing. Kind of what this is. If A Christmas Carol wasn't one of the most famous stories in the English canon, I could legit be like, I just found this one day. Oh, it's so mysterious. But in actual fact, I bought it from Hay-on-Wye. Hay-on-Wye is a town on the border of England and Wales, which is famous around the whole world for being a town full of bookshops. It's a tiny little town made up of like 5 streets, and there's like 50 bookshops. It's the book town. And I grew up like a 20-minute drive from Hay-on-Wye. Never went there as a kid because I didn't read as a kid. I didn't know it existed. And now, if ever I go home to visit my family, I go to Hay-on-Wye. And I picked this up. It was just like, I went there in like December, bought a bunch of books, and in this one old bookshop was just like a crate full of these leather-bound Christmas carols sitting on the counter. And I bought one. It was lovely. It's the Necronomicon. Yes, it's the Necronomicon of Christmas. Yeah, Letice, I love Hay-on-Wye as well. I haven't been in age. I don't know how long it's been since I've been to Hay-on-Wye. And I live pretty far from there right now as well. But it is a wonderful, wonderful place. So my plan is to read the first 2 staves. If you've never read A Christmas Carol, it is, because it's a carol, it's in 5 staves. And the first 2 make up the first half, and then it's about 110 pages, this copy, and I'm going to do the first 50 pages today, and then tune in tomorrow for the second half. And I typically try to read this book every Christmas Eve. It's just a thing that I do. I've been trying to do it every year. Sometimes I forget, sometimes I'm busy, whatever. And this time I thought, let's do it on stream. It's going to be really fun. I love narrating. I love reading out loud. For the past 2 weeks, my partner and I, in bed every night, have been reading Terry Pratchett's Hogfather, taking turns narrating that. And that's been really, really fun. We're like halfway through it, so kind of probably should speed ahead. Anyway. Oh my God, that's so beautiful. Pocket edition of A Christmas Carol, red with gold foiling and gold. I mean, yeah, that sounds like this. That sounds so much like this copy. Every Christmas Eve. I read it every Christmas Eve as well. Yeah, absolutely. Or at least I try to, like I said. I think I read this last Christmas Eve. I think I did a video about it. Oh, Daniela, you've got a PDF. That is so sweet. I love that. Um, wait, what's the last of the spirits? Am I supposed to know that? I don't know that. What is that? Christmas Carol retelling. Okay. Can you link that in the chat? I want to know what that is. I have no idea what the last of the spirits is. I've never even heard of that. So yes, either link it in the chat or remind me, and I will Google it at some point. I also have, if you've heard this story before, because I have told this story before, in fact, I made a TikTok about it earlier today. I do have a funny story about my relationship with this book, which is that about 10 years ago, I was a teacher. I was a drama teacher, and I taught for a little while at a school in the UAE. And while I was teaching there, my boss asked me to put on a play. I was the drama slash English teacher. She asked me to put on a play, and because it was Christmas, but because it was like a majority Muslim school, she was like, nothing too Christian themed, but still Christmas themed. And the only thing I could think of was A Christmas Carol, which has sort of the morals of Christmas without it being Christian in any overt way. And so I put it on. Turns out she'd never heard of A Christmas Carol. And on the day of the performance, as all the audience are flooding in, which were all the younger kids and their parents were all flooding into the hall, and the older kids I had been rehearsing with to put on the play, which, by the way, wasn't an adaptation of the book. It was literally a stage adaptation of A Muppet Christmas Carol. I just turned the film script into a play script, and that was a lot of fun. So it was a musical. And as everyone was getting prepared, and there was only going to be the one performance, my boss rushes up to me backstage and she goes, I found out that there are ghosts in this play. And I was like, well, they're not real ghosts. They're children dressed as ghosts. And she said, well, the children will still be frightened if there are ghosts. And I said to her, do you think they're real ghosts? Because I just told you they're not. Do you think these are real ghosts? And she marched off to go, I think, pull the plug. I don't know, she vanished. The plug was not pulled. And the play, I put the play on anyway. But she was insane, and I have no idea to this day if she thought that there were real ghosts in the play. She had no idea what A Christmas Carol was. I told her the kids were playing ghosts, and she was like, no, it'd be frightening. So, no idea. Yeah. Oh my god. Newsbro, thank you so much. Once Upon a Book Club. Is that like a crate, like a monthly book subscription crate box kind of thing? Because I've never heard of that. Once Upon a Book Club. I've had a few subscription boxes that I've tried out in the past. Yeah, I did some sponsorships as well. They were really fun. Subscription boxes are awesome, but yeah. The Nutcracker, a horror retelling, The Nutcracker Bleeds. But oh my god, that's so cool. Do you know, I've never read The Nutcracker. Christmas morning, 100%, 2 days from now, my partner and I are going to watch The Nutcracker, like recording of the ballet. That's what we did last Christmas. But I have never read The Nutcracker. I didn't even know it was a Dumas story. Wow. Revealing my ignorance on stream right now for everyone to see. That is so cool. Yeah, watching the ballet on Christmas morning while you open presents is absolutely delightful. It's my favorite thing to do. And then we watch Pirates of the Caribbean, and then we watch Knives Out, because they're my two favorite films. So I watch them on Christmas Day every single year. And my partner's just had to jump in and join that. Okay, enough waffling. I told you my silly little story. And oh, Annabelle, thank you so much. Thank you for joining. I'm sorry you can't be home for Christmas. I have missed a few Christmases myself as well when I've lived in other places. And Once Upon a Book Club sends a book with a bunch of small gifts that have to do with the books. Yes, so a lot of subscription boxes do this. That one I've never heard of, but I will absolutely check that out. Thank you so much. There are some great subscription boxes out there. There was one that I was sponsored by. They do independent books and self-published books, and they kind of give independent writers the opportunity to reach a larger audience. They were really, really cool. I did some sponsorship stuff with them. They were really, really great. Okay, so the ballet is based on the Dumas version. I had no idea. That's really, really cool. I have to read that now. I had no idea. I only ever think of the ballet. Oh, Lizzie, thank you very, very much. That photo that I use for all my stream thumbnails, and I'll be doing that like from now on. I literally took that photo a few months ago, and now I put it everywhere. I put it everywhere. Okay, I'm going to read this. I'm going to start now with Stave 1, Marley's Ghost. This book, this story has one of my favorite opening lines in the whole wide world. And I think I'll probably do a kind of masculine voice for this because it suits the tone of it. So, and also there are like very few female characters in this. And if you can do a masculine voice, why wouldn't you for this particular occasion? So let's jump in. Stave 1, Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. If they were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable in his taking a stroll at night, in an easterly wind, upon his own ramparts, than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him, no wind that blew was bitterer than he, no falling snow was more intent upon its purpose, no pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked. To edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, biting, bleak weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warn them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. And so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter, and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed. "A very Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first imitation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome. His eyes sparkled and his breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle?" said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I am sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas! What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be so dismal? What reason have you to be so morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said "Bah!" again, and followed it up with "Humbug!" "Don't be so cross, Uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer, a time for balancing your books and having every item in 'em through around a dozen of months presented a dread against you. If I could work my will, said Scrooge indignantly, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart, he should. Uncle, pleaded the nephew. Nephew, returned the uncle sternly, keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine. Keep it, repeated Scrooge's nephew. But you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone then, said Scrooge. Much good may it do you, much good it has ever done you. There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, returned the nephew. Christmas among the rest, but I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on another journey. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Let me hear another word from you, said Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir, he added, turning to his nephew. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said that he would see him in that extremity first. But why? Oh, no, wrong person. But why? Said Scrooge's nephew. Why? Why did you get married? Said Scrooge. Well, because I fell in love. Because you fell in love? Growled Scrooge, as if it were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Nay, uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I am sorry, with all my heart, to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humour to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. There's another fellow, muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. My clerk, with 15 shillings a week, and a wife and a family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam. This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe, said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years, said Scrooge. He died 7 years ago this very night. Oh, we have no doubt his liberality is well represented in his surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for there had been two kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed the credentials back. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir. Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. And the union workhouses? Demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? They are, still, returned the gentleman. I wish I could say they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigour then, said Scrooge. Both very busy, sir. Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I'm very glad to hear it. Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, returned the gentleman, a few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink, and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What should I put you down for? Nothing, Scrooge replied. You wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would die, said Scrooge, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that. But you might know it, observed the gentleman. It's not my business, Scrooge returned. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labours with an improved opinion of himself, and in a more facetious temper than was usual with him. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened so that people ran about with flaring links, proffering their services to go before horses in carriages and conduct themselves on their way. The ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping slightly down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds with tremulous vibrations afterwards, as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. The cold became intense. In the main street at the corner of the court, some labourers were repairing the gas pipes and had lighted a great fire in a brazier, round which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and winking their eyes before the blaze in rapture. The water plug being left in solitude, its overflowing sullenly congealed and turned to misanthropic ice. The brightness of the shops, where holly sprigs and berries crackled in the lamp heat of the windows, made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Poulterers and grocers' trades became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant, with which it was next to impossible to believe that such dull principles as bargain and sale had anything to do. The Lord Mayor, in the stronghold of the mighty mansion house, gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as a Lord Mayor's household should. And even the little tailor, whom he had fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty in the streets, stirred up tomorrow's pudding in his garret. while his lean wife and the baby sallied out to buy the beef. Foggier yet, and colder. Piercing, searching, biting cold. If the good St. Dunstan had but nipped the evil spirit's nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using his familiar weapons, then indeed he would have roared to lusty purpose. The owners of one scant young nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry gold as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. That's the name of the book. But at the first sound of... I'm not singing it. God bless you, merry gentlemen. May nothing you dismay. Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost. At length the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It is not convenient," said Scrooge. "And it's not fair. If I was to stop 1/2 crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work?" The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down to a slide on Cornhill at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honour of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at blind man's bluff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard, where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying it must have been run there when it was a young house, playing at hide-and-seek with other houses, and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now, and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it, night and morning, during his whole residence in that place. Also, that Scrooge had a little of what is called fancy about him, as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, alderman, livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on his ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid colour made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. This is Bailey's, by the way, or like a cheap knockoff of Bailey's. It's really good. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause, with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtail sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Pooh-pooh," and closed it with a bang. There is no way to make pooh-pooh sound menacing in any way. Humbug is interesting. Like, I think this story is like the only time I've ever heard the word humbug actually used in any way. Poo-poo doesn't work. It's that's not going to happen. I'm going to stop a sec just to. So I was an audiobook narrator. There is a book behind me that I did, in fact, narrate. I had an agent for a while, and she got me one audiobook, and then sadly, the agency had to shut down. They've been open for years and years, and they had to shut down, and I never got a new agent because I then moved up to Scotland, and all of the audiobook work is in London, so it was just, yeah. Anyway, I would love to narrate more audiobooks. It was a really amazing time, and it was really, really fun, and I dream of doing it. And I haven't done gruff, gravelly, masculine voices in ages. My throat is throbbing now, so I'm just going to take a second. Ads. Yes. Okay. This is the second time I've ever done a stream. And yes, I did like click to enable ads, but I have no idea how ads work on a stream because it's supposed to be live. And now I'm like, oh my God, is everyone else like a minute behind because an ad popped up? How does it? I don't know how it works. It's really, really weird. But yes, I did enable ads because this is my job, but I don't know how it works. Anyway, I'm sure it's fine. I mean, YouTube knows what it's doing, right? Maybe. Okay, so narrating audiobooks is exactly as fun as you think it would be. It's really, really fun. I had such an amazing time. The engineer that I worked with, Chris, I believe his name was a really lovely guy. And while I was narrating the LGBTQ plus history book audiobook, which is what I did, while I was doing that, it took like a week. And one afternoon, I went in to do pickups, which is like when there's errors that they need to, iron out, and you need to pop back in to clean up some stuff that wasn't right the first time. He told me, no, Alex. I think his name was Alex. Yeah, it was Alex. Anyway, Alex told me that the chair that I was sitting in that afternoon, Andy Serkis had been sitting there that morning doing the audiobook for The Silmarillion, I think it was. He's done all the audiobooks for The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion. And so I sat where Andy Serkis had sat like an hour before, which was so cool. So anyway, that's my little audiobook story. I narrated one audiobook. I got paid decently for it. Like if you could do like 2 audiobooks a month, that would be a career. But you really have to, like, yeah, it's tough going. Yeah, I did feel fancy. I was like, does the seat feel warm? No. It's kind of creepy getting Andy Serkis's warmth. Can we carry on now? Because I'm not going to think too much about Andy Serkis's bum warmth. Yeah. It keeps up with you live, so you just miss a few seconds. They're very short ads. Amazing. Thank you for letting me know that. Yeah, the ad thing is weird. I don't know exactly how to. Okay, fine. Good to know. Good to get some money for doing this, but at the same time, like if the ads were a problem, I'd just disable them because, yeah, like it's more important that you guys have fun. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, poo poo. Okay. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellar below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. You may talk vaguely about driving a coach and six up a good old flight of stairs or through a bad young Act of Parliament, but I mean to say you might have got a hearse up that staircase and taken it broadwise, and the splinter bar toward the wall and the door toward the balustrades, and done it easy. There was plenty of width for that, and room to spare, which is perhaps the reason why Scrooge, though he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom, thought. Yeah, this bit is so weird. Like, he thinks he sees a hearse go up the stairs. It's a really creepy. Like, I've seen a few film adaptations, and I've never seen them include this bit, as far as I remember. But there's one. I'm going to bring this up now. There is one. So when I was in school, there was. I remember, like, when I was at school, it was normal to put on a lot of films in the last like few days leading up to Christmas or the summer holiday. By the time I became a teacher, it was like frowned upon to do that. Like kids had to like just do normal lessons until the end of, yeah. Anyway, but I remember watching like 3 different versions of A Christmas Carol when I was in like year 9, when I was like 14. That was definitely because my teacher didn't want to do any work. So we watched like a Muppet Christmas Carol and another blah blah blah. There was one version of A Christmas Carol that we watched, and it was absolutely terrifying. I cannot remember who was in it. I don't know who directed it. It predated A Muppet Christmas Carol. It was probably from the 80s, maybe. And there was a moment where the ghost of Christmas Present, and this happens in the book, as we'll get to tomorrow. There is a moment where the ghost of Christmas Present is wearing this big open coat, but a big shut tight coat, and he opens it up, and standing at his feet on either side of him are 2 children, and they are Scrooge's children, the children of his greed and his darkness. They are these evil, ghostly apparitions that resemble his darkness, his inner turmoil or whatever. And in that film adaptation, it is absolutely frightening. Like the ghost of Christmas Present is all jolly and happy, and he loves food and blah blah blah. And he opens up his coat, and there are these 2 ghostly children standing there. It was, oh my god! I was like 14 when I saw it. I swear I pissed myself. It was horrible. I remember it so clearly. I'm going to find it on YouTube at some point. Was it black and white? No, not in my memory. It's not black and white. It wasn't that old. The Albert Finney version. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lettice. I will look that up in a bit because, oh, it was horrifying. I just remember like they're arguing back and forth, and he goes, "Look beneath my robe," and it's like lightning flashes, and it was horrible. And then there's these two ghostly pale children standing there. Oh, it was horrible, absolutely terrifying. Scrooged. Is it called? Okay, thank you, Ruby. I will look that up. That sounds kind of familiar. Um, anyway, it really stuck with me when I was a kid. I thought it was terrifying. Oh my god. Um, okay, hearse, the hearse. Yes, the hearse was going up the stairs. Blah blah blah. Okay, half a dozen gas lamps out of the street wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose that it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel. Scrooge had a cold in his head upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room, as usual. Old fireguard, old shoes, two fish baskets, washing stand on the three legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed. Nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it. Before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel, the fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and paved all round with quaint Dutch tiles, designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds like feather beds, Abrahams, Belshazzars, apostles putting off to sea in butter boats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts, and yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like the ancient prophet's rod and swallowed up the whole. If each smooth tile had been a blank at first, with power to shape some picture on its surface from the disjointed fragments of his thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one, said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell, that hung in the room, and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun, together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. Fun fact. I've talked before on my channel. If you've been around for a while, you might know that I did not grow up reading books at all. And I was like 15, 16 when a friend of mine turned to me one day and said that I should read his Dark Materials. So Northern Lights, The Subtle Knife, and The Golden Compass. No, The Golden Compass is what Northern Lights is called in the US. The Amber Spyglass is the third one. So Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials trilogy. I read it, I got into books, I got into reading, and the rest is basically history. But I came very, very close to actually getting into reading a few years before that when I was in year 7. So I was 11, 12 years old. And I had to read A Christmas Carol. And I read it at school. And we were given I remember this so clearly. I grew up in the countryside in an old Victorian stone cottage at the edge of a forest. Like, I grew up in basically like a witch's cottage. Like a really, really, it was just old stone. It was built in, my house was built in like 1850. And we had this old fireplace, and the stone was exposed on the inside living room walls. So it was quite cold in the winter. We had the fireplace lit and everything. And I remember I had to read A Christmas Carol, and I took a copy home and I read the first stave, the bit we're reading now. And this bit, when he hears the chains dragging on the floorboards, I can still remember sitting in my parents' living room next to the fire, reading that bit, and having to shut the book out of absolute fear. I was so petrified by this moment. And I remember being so impacted by the events of the book in a way that I never had been by like a song or a film or a TV show or anything. I was like, wow, books are more powerful and impactful on your imagination. And I was like 12 years old. And at that moment, I came so close to actually figuring out that reading as a hobby, as a thing you do every day, would probably be a good thing to do for my imagination. But the idea didn't manage to sink deep enough into the waters of my brain to actually fester there and become a habit. I just took another like 4 years to actually click and go, oh, reading's great. And now, I was an English teacher, and now I review books and blah, blah, blah. The rest is history. But when I was 12, I came so close to actually figuring that out because of this moment, this exact moment here with the dragging chains and just being hypnotized was so scary. It's so effective. Reading it now, it's only a paragraph. But when I was a kid and I read this, it felt like it went on for pages. Dragging chains, dragging and dragging. And Scrooge, just being frozen with fear. But it's actually just a paragraph. But when I was a kid, it was everything. Yeah. It's not the Albert one. Okay, Ruby, thank you for looking for it, because I'm so curious about what version that is with the ghosts. Thank you for looking into it. Okay, where was I? The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His colour changed, though, when without a pause it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leapt up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. The same face! The very same! Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the two buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked the phantom through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much," Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. "You're particular, for a shade." He was going to say "to a shade," but substituted this as more appropriate. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. "I can." "Do it then." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of its being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me," observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. Yes, there's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." That is one of the best lines ever, 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 ever. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. To sit staring at those fixed, glazed eyes in silence for a moment would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. There was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but this was clearly the case, for though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated as by the hot vapour from an oven. "You see this toothpick?" said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge, for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though it were only for a second, to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself. "I do," replied the ghost. "You are not looking at it," said Scrooge. "But I see it," said the ghost, notwithstanding. "Well," returned Scrooge, "I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you! Humbug!" At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry, and shook its chains with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "Mercy!" he said. "Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?" "Man of the worldly mind," replied the ghost, "do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. "I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man," the ghost returned, "that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turned to happiness." Again, the spectre raised a cry and shook its chains and wrung its shadowy hands. "You are fettered," said Scrooge, trembling. "Tell me why." "I wear the chain I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on with my own free will, and of my free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Or would you know," pursued the ghost, "the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. Is it a ponderous chain?" Scrooge glanced about him on the floor, in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. "Jacob," he said imploringly. "Old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob." "I have none to give," the ghost replied. "It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in my life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me." It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting his eyes or getting off his knees. "You must have been so very slow about it, Jacob," Scrooge offered, in a businesslike manner, though with humility and deference. "Slow!" the ghost repeated. 7 years dead," mused Scrooge, "and travelling all the time." "The whole time," said the ghost. "No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse." "You travel fast?" said Scrooge. "On the wings of the wind," replied the ghost. "You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years," said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry and clanked its chains so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for a nuisance. "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. "Business!" cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." It held up its chain at arm's length, as if it were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. At this time of the rolling year, Spectre said, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me? Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. Hear me, cried the ghost. My time is nearly gone. I will, said Scrooge, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. How is it that I appear before you in a shape that you can see I may not tell? I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day. It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the perspiration from his brow. That is no light part of my penance, pursued the ghost. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer. You're always a good friend to me, said Scrooge. Thank ye. You will be haunted, resumed the ghost, by 3 spirits. Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as the ghost's had done. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? He demanded in a faltering voice. It is. I think I'd rather not. Without their visits, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over, Jacob? Hinted Scrooge. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, the third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us. When it has said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it round its head as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound its teeth made when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again and found his supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude, with its chain wound over and about its arm. The apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped. Not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear. For on the raising of the hand, he became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity. He looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty governments, were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He'd been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat, with a monstrous iron safe attached to his ankle, who cried piteous at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant whom it saw below upon a doorstep. The misery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost the power forever. Whether these creatures faded into mist or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. But they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he had locked it with his hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say, "Humbug!" but stopped at the first syllable, and being, from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. Okay, that is stave 1. Okay, Ruby, have you got it? 1984, the Scott version. YouTube compiled the clips. Oh my god, I don't know if I want to see it. Okay. So there is a clip of the scary children on YouTube. Oh my god. I don't know if I can watch it again. Or I'll watch it and go, oh, okay, was that it? You know, because I was like 14 and I was scared of everything. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it's not. I guess we'll find out, but I'm a little bit scared. Oh, Sayan, thank you so much. So the reading, thank you. The reading is, it's very interesting. My throat is, oh my god, my throat is so sore. So I had to sort of change the Marley voice. Not the Marley voice, the Scrooge voice, because it was just like too much. Oh, it's so weird. Like, I love being able to switch my voice and do masculine voices. And honestly, like, I have more range in doing different voices when I go into a more masculine thing, because like when I trained my voice to, you know, when I got voice feminization, there's only one feminine voice that I can do. Whereas with a masculine voice, I've had 30 plus years of like learning to do different voices and blah, blah, blah. I've also noticed if I speak in a different language or a different accent, my voice goes like super masculine. Like, I can't remember why I was doing this. I was looking something up in Japanese and I like spoke out loud a bit of Japanese and I went like full deep masculine voice. Like I didn't know how to say anything in Japanese in a more feminine voice. It's really weird. So that's just something that like the voice training took like 12 weeks, but it's an ongoing process. Like in the time since I stopped training, my voice has changed, blah, blah, blah. It's a whole thing. But anyway, putting on a masculine voice is really good for just giving me a bit more range, you know? Oh, Daniela, thank you very much. Yeah, the voice talent. Yeah, I don't know if it is impressive, to be honest, but thank you very much. It's really hard going into a masculine voice after a while, but do you know what, Abby? I don't like tea. Not very English of me, but I don't like tea. I drink like 8 cups of coffee a day. So, yeah, Seattle Voice Lab. Yeah, I think, yeah, they're who I went with, and I had to do a GoFundMe. They're so expensive. Their voice training is really, really good, but it is so pricey. I went with Seattle Voice Lab because they're who Abigail Thorne went with, and I loved how her voice turned out at the end. And mine is kind of similar now because I went through the same training, but it is really tough and it is really expensive. So I did a GoFundMe and I was so lucky to have like Probably like 3/4 of it funded through GoFundMe, which was absolutely amazing. People were so kind and supportive, and I'm so grateful. Um, Yay, you don't like tea either. Amazing. I'll drink like fruity teas or like green tea is okay, but like standard like black English breakfast tea, as we call it, can't stand it. My partner drinks it all the time. I can't even stand the smell of it. Okay, so stave 2 um, is around the same length, and then we'll be halfway through, and we'll do the second half of the book tomorrow. This has worked out really perfectly. Yay! This is like a perfect little 2-session thing. Okay, Annie, enjoy your coffee. It is definitely too late for me, although I would. During the pandemic, during lockdown, I used to drink coffee at like midnight because I lost all sense of time. Now I've got Bailey's. Okay, I'll crack on. Stave 2, if my voice can take it. The first of the 3 spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that, looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavouring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighbouring church struck the 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12! It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12! He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. "Why, it isn't possible," said Scrooge, "that I could have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon." The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could do, all he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and then possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after sight of the first exchange to pay Ebenezer Scrooge or his order, and so forth, would have become a mere United States security if there was no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again, and thought and thought and thought it over and over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavoured not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again, like a strong spring released, to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in the state until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong! "A quarter past," said Scrooge, counting. "Ding dong! Half past," said Scrooge. "Ding dong! A quarter to it," said Scrooge. "Ding dong! The hour itself," said Scrooge triumphantly. "And nothing else?" He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy one. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. Not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face had addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them, as close to it as I am now to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were like those upper members bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strange thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using. In its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality. For as its belt sparkled and glittered, now in one part and now in another, and what was light one instant at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again distinct and clear as ever. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close behind him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in its cap, and begged him to be covered. "What!" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and forced me through whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow?" Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend, or any knowledge of having wilfully bonneted the spirit at any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. Your welfare, said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, Your reclamation, then! Take heed! It put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. Rise and walk with me. It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes. That bed was warm, and the thermometer a long way below freezing, and he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made toward the window, clasped his robe in supplication. I am a mortal, Scrooge remonstrated, and liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand there, said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, and you shall be upheld in more than this. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road, with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground. Good heaven, said Scrooge, clasping his hands together, as he looked about him. I was bred in this place. I was a boy here. The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. Your lip is trembling, said the ghost. And what is that upon your cheek? Scrooge muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice, that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. You recollect the way? Inquired the spirit. Remember it? Cried Scrooge with fervour. I could walk it blindfolded. Strange to have forgotten it for so many years, observed the ghost. Let us go on. They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some shaggy ponies were now seen trotting towards them, with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts, driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits, and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. These are but shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. They have no consciousness of us. That is a word you can't really. That is a word I've never ever heard anyone say. So, absolutely, please let me know if you know what this word is. It's spelled Jocund. It feels like it could be like a Swedish word that's spelled with like a y, like jokund. Jokund, jokund. I have no idea how to say this word because I've never heard anyone say it out loud. I only ever read it. So, should probably Google it. Anyway, the jocund travelers came on. I have no idea. And as they came, Scrooge knew and named every one of them. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads and byways? for their several homes. What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas! What good had it ever done him? The school is not quite deserted, said the ghost. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still. Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of dull red bricks, with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof, and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were little used, their walls were damp and mossy, the windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach houses and sheds were overrun with grass, nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within. For entering the dull and dreary hall, and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and fast. There was an earthly savour in the air, a chilly bareness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight, and not too much to eat. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the panelling, not a drip from the half-thawed waterspout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar. Not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door, no, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence and gave a freer passage to his tears. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Suddenly a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt and leading by the bridle an ass laden with wood. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old honest Ali Baba! Yes, yes, I know. One Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here alone, he did come for the first time just like that, poor boy. And Valentine," said Scrooge, "and his wild brother Orson. There they go. And what's his name, who was put in his drawers asleep at the gate of Damascus? Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom, turned upside down by the genie. There he is upon his head. Serves him right. I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess?" To hear Scrooge expending all the earnestness of his nature on such subjects in most an extraordinary voice, between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened and excited face, would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city indeed. "There's the parrot!" cried Scrooge. "Green body and yellow tail, with a thing like lettuce growing out of the top of his head. There he is! Poor Robin Crusoe! He called him when he came home again after sailing round the island. Poor Robin Crusoe! Where have you been, Robin Crusoe?" The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. It was the parrot, you know. There goes Friday, running for his life up the little creek. "Hello! Whoop, hello!" Then, with a rapidity of transition very foreign to his usual character, he said, in pity of his former self, "Poor boy," and cried again. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff. "But it's too late now." "What's the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so. But there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously toward the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. "I have come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fan?" returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home, for good and all. Home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. That home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you. And you're to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes, "and are never to come back here. But first, we're to be together all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in the world." "You are quite a woman, little Fan," exclaimed the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him, in her childish eagerness, toward the door, and he, nothing loath to go, accompanied her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Mr. Scrooge's box there!" And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared on Master Scrooge with a ferocious condescension, and threw him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. He then conveyed him and his sister into the veriest old well of a shivering best parlour that ever was seen, where the maps upon the wall and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered installments of those dainties to the young people, at the same time sending out a meagre servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but if it was the same tap as he had tasted before, he'd rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time on to the top of the chaise, the children bade the schoolmaster good-bye right willingly, and getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the hoarfrost and snow from off the dark leaves and the evergreens like spray. "Always a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered," said the ghost, "but she had a large heart." "So she had," said Scrooge. "You're right. I will not gainsay it, spirit. God forbid." "She died a woman," said the ghost, "and had, as I think, children." "One child," Scrooge returned. "True," said the ghost. "Your nephew," Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, "Yes." Although they had but a moment left in the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too it was Christmas time again, but it was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. "Know it?" said Scrooge. "Was I apprenticed here?" They went in. At sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller he must have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked upon the clock, at which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer! Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. "Dick Wilkins, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. "Bless me, yes, there he is! He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick, dear, dear." "Yo-ho, my boys!" said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas Eve, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up," cried old Fezziwig, with a sharp clap of his hands, "before a man can say Jack Robinson." You wouldn't believe how those two fellows went at it. They charged into the street with the shutters, 1, 2, 3, had 'em up in their places, 4, 5, 6, barred 'em and pinned 'em, 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have got to 12, panting like racehorses. "Hilly-ho!" cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from the high desk and with wonderful agility. "Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick! Cheer up, Ebenezer!" Clear away! There was nothing they couldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away. Could have, wouldn't have, and couldn't have. With old Fezziwig looking on, it was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as if it were dismissed from public life forevermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was a snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomachaches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young fellows whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door. But one who was proved to have been who have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after the other, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couples at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple, always turning up in the wrong place. New top couple staring off again as soon as they got there. Old top couple at last, and not a button one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done! and the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But scorning rest upon his appearance, he instantly began again, though there was no dance as yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home exhausted on a shutter, and he was a brand new man, resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was Negus? Don't know what that word is. And there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler, an artful dog, mind, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told it him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. And then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them, 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance, and had no notion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. And that's not high praise. Tell me higher and I'll use it. A positive light appeared no issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would have become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advanced and retired, both hands to your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs, and came upon his feet again without a stagger. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 prentices, they did the same to them. And thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self. He corroborated everything, and underwent the strangest agitations. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost, and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small!" echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices, who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4, perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter, self. "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the god insisted. "No," said Scrooge. "No, I should like to be able to say a word or 2 to my clerk just now." That's all. His former self turned down the lamp as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. My time grows short, observed the spirit. Quick! This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again, Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man, in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past. It matters little, she said softly, to you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in the time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has displaced you? He rejoined. A golden one. This is the even-handed dealing of the world, he said. There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth. You fear the world too much, she answered gently. All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not? What then? He retorted. Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? Am I not changed towards you? She shook her head. Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content. Oh, hang on. Hang on. Who said? No, that is right. Okay, that's weird. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until in good season we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man. I was a boy, he said impatiently. Your own feeling tells that you are not what you are, she returned. I am that which promised happiness. When we were one in heart is fraught. My cat came in. Hi, baby. What did you get in here? No, the door's open. You want to say hi? Hang on. Come here. Hi. Oh. Hello. Hi, baby. You smell babies, huh? Yeah. Hi, everyone. Say hello. Yeah, your claws are in me a little bit. This is Mary Wollstonecraft, and she's very cuddly sometimes. Now she wants to go away. You curious? Yeah? Yeah? You gonna stay? You gonna stay here? No? Okay. Okay. Alright. If you see directly into her bumhole, I'm very sorry. She does that a lot. She likes it at this chair. The chair is made of like this mesh stuff, and she loves climbing up it. So, yeah. Are you gonna stay there? Okay. Yeah, no, this this is fine. What was I? Have I ever sought release? In words, no, never. In what then? Okay. In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end. in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, said the girl, looking mildly but with steadiness upon him, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? Oh, no. He seemed to yield to the justice of the supposition in spite of himself. But he said with a struggle, you think not? I would gladly think otherwise if I could, she answered. Heaven knows, when I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can I even believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You who, in your very confidence with her, weigh everything by gain, or choosing her if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed, you may. The memory of what is past half makes me hope you will. Have pain in this. A very, very brief time, and you will dismiss this recollection of it gladly. Now she wants to go out. Oh, this chair does not move. Go on, shoot. Shoot. Go on. Yes, go on. Thank you. My God. Okay, now watch as she scratches at the door. Right. Where was I? She left him. That's a good next line. And they parted. I'm wearing pajamas. Out of context, that's funny. I just didn't expect you all to see my pajama bottoms, but here we are. They are Christmas themed. Yeah, she left him and they parted. Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? Oh my God. Okay. When you find out your partner is watching your stream from like just over there. Hi, honey. How angry is Mary, really? Okay, well, I can hear her scratching, so that's how angry. Okay. One shudder more, exclaimed the ghost. No more, said Scrooge. No more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more. But the relentless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene and place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like the last one that Scrooge believed it was the same until he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge, in his agitated state of mind, could count. And unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, they were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily and enjoyed it very much, and the latter, soon beginning to mingle in the sports, got pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What would I not have given to be one of them? Though I never could have been so rude. No, I wouldn't for the wealth of all the world. have crushed that braided hair and torn it down, and for the precious little shoe I wouldn't have plucked it off. God bless my soul to save my life. As to reassuring her waist in sport as they did, bold young brood, I couldn't have done it. I should have expected my arm to have grown round it for a punishment and never come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked, I own, to have touched her lips, to have questioned her, that she might have opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of their downcast eyes and never raised a blush, to have let loose waves of hair, an inch of which would be a keepsake beyond price. In short, I should have liked, I do confess, to have had the lightest license of a child, and yet to have been man enough to know its value. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she, with laughing face and plundered dress, was borne toward it, the centre of a flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and the struggling and the onslaught that was made on the defenceless porter, the scaling him with chairs for ladders to dive into his pockets, to spoil him of brown paper parcels, hold on tight by his cravat, hug him round his neck, pommel his back and kick his legs. In irrepressible affection. The shouts of wonder and delight with which the development of every package was received. The terrible announcement that the baby had been taken in the act of putting a doll's frying pan into his mouth, and was more than suspected of having swallowed a fictitious turkey glued on a wooden platter. The immense relief of finding this a false alarm. The joy and gratitude and ecstasy. They are all indescribably alike. It is enough that by degrees the children and their emotions got out of the parlour, and by one stair at a time up to the top of the house, where they went to bed and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside. And when the thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed. Belle, said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon. Who was it? Guess. How can I? Tut, I don't know, she added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. Mr. Scrooge. Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and as it was not shut up, and he had a candle inside, I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat alone, quite alone in the world, I do believe. Spirit, said Scrooge in a broken voice, remove me from this place. I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. That they are what they are, do not blame me. Remove me, Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it. He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer. In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghost was with no visible resistance on its part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him, he seized the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. Cool. Okay. Halfway. That is the end of part 1. I was kind of hoping that this would be a 2-hour thing, 4 hours total, and I did it. Absolutely amazing. That was really, really cool. Oh my god, Eliza, that's really cool. That was your first time listening to it. That's awesome. The audiobook that I looked up for like reference, because I've never listened to the audiobook of this. The audiobook that I looked up was Hugh Grant doing it. I think it's on Audible, which is really, really cool. And it said that it took like 4 hours. So I was like, okay, great. That's 2 streams. And yeah, this was really, really fun. I'm so glad. I'm really, really glad that you guys had fun. This was awesome. I'm really, really glad I did this. My throat is absolutely burning from doing those voices though. Oh my god. Wow. Your first time having like any contact with this. That's really special. Wow. Well, I'm really, really flattered that you chose my stream for that. That's really, really cool. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, which means I'm probably going to watch the Muppet version at some point tomorrow. I can't wait, honestly. I cannot wait to watch that. Again, also like an every year kind of a thing. Because also the Muppet version has one of my favorite lines in any film, which is when he meets the ghost of Christmas Present, who's a big giant guy. And he says, and he's a bit like, I don't know what the word is. Well, he calls him absent-minded. And Scrooge says, "You're a little absent-minded spirit." And he goes, "No, I'm a large absent-minded spirit." And that is one of my favorite jokes in the whole wide world. Scattered, yeah. I like that, yeah. Basically, the ghost of Christmas Present has ADHD, and I relate. Cool, okay. So, I think probably going to go to bed now, to be honest. So, if you enjoyed this, I will be doing the second half at the exact same time tomorrow for Christmas Eve. It's like 10 pages longer than what I just read. So I'm probably not going to do much preamble at the beginning. I'm just going to dive straight into it. I know that tomorrow is Christmas Eve and you might be busy if you're a Christmas person, as I am. If you can make it, I'd really, really appreciate it. This has been so much fun. And we'll finish it off tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone who came along. Thank you for watching. And yeah, I'm going to finish my Baileys and go to bed. Baileys? Baileys, yeah, that's right. Okay, right, I'll stop here. I will see everyone tomorrow. I hope you can make it. And hopefully I can recover my voice in the meantime. Merry Christmas to everyone who celebrates. And if you have time, go watch the Muppet version because it's the best adaptation of anything ever, in my opinion. And then join me tomorrow. Bye for now. Oh, okay, wait, sorry, Hogfather, yes. Luciana, if you weren't here at the beginning, I did mention that my partner and I are currently reading through the Hogfather together, doing all the different voices and things, and it's a lot of fun. Maybe next year. No, I can't. I can't do the Hogfather on stream because it's not public domain. The reason I can do this is because it's in the public domain. Like no one owns this because it's old. So if something's over 100 years old, it's usually in the public domain, and then you can monetize or publicly do something like this. Hogfather, can't stream it, wouldn't work. It would be like a whole legal thing probably. But I am reading it privately, which is my second time. And I think on Boxing Day, my partner and I are going to watch the TV adaptation of Hogfather, which I think was made by the BBC a few years ago, and it has David Jason in it as Albert, the Death's what's the word? Servant, I guess. Yeah, yeah. Ho, ho, ho is Death doing the Hogfather. Sky. Okay, fine. You know what? I'm going. Correcting me. How very dare you. I'll see you tomorrow for the second half. Bye, 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 bye. And subscribe for books.